The 5th chapter. What is it that I regret? Not being the first man to scar your face, I suppose. Never shall a day pass without you recollecting your hate for him. The last words of Gideon Gipfel. The amorphous black vestige that was the abyss rippled over Deicide's skin, causing him to shift and roll over in bed. The tiny red lights at the tips of his antennas were extinguished, the telltale sign that an obstrusion was dead or in a deep sleep. Lacking the ability to manipulate the man's state of consciousness mentally, the abyss needled his feet with her oily tendrils and watched him flinch, waking up the woman who was dozing next to him. The lights in his antennas instantly came on. Deicide turned in near darkness to find the abyss's enormous yellow eyes smiling back at him, like two great moons hanging in a starless night. He tossed the covers away and caught sight of the ship's plan of the day displayed on the wall ahead of him. It had also begun to stream itself on his optical implants. He cursed the redundancy before switching the wall display off with a hand gesture. Already the amanuensis array was sending him an endless stream of information to the forward parts of his external mind. He became aware that he wanted to know what time it was, and then it faded in briefly on his optical implants, and then disappeared. As he plodded to the bathroom, he was briefed top-secret material on the climate of the cities he would visit on his tour. Not that he really needed to know any of it. The rebels' previous assassination attempts had been humorous, and lightened the mood of these normally dull routines. It was then that his companion twisted under covers and poked her head out. It was covered in thick, tight brown curls that framed her tanned face. "It's early," she said, her voice croaking. "Let me call the girls so I can get ready. No need to wake them," Deicide said quickly, for if Sanandra was allowed to go, he would be flooded with requests from every civilian when he made his trips to the city platters. With no trace of doubt, their desire to visit will be fueled by some racist curiosities about full-blooded humans. Besides, there was sure to be some curvy, oval-faced darling in his entourage somewhere, in a variety of shades no less, as Hellmouth had constantly preached to him. The need for redundancies must be minimized. Deicide grinned to himself, thinking about which way Hellmouth's lips would curl if it was mentioned how he was corrupting her edicts. "I'm just heading to the districts," Deicide said. "Oh," Sanandra said. Her hurt might have snuck under Deicide's high threshold if not for the abyss. "Well, make sure you eat breakfast," Sanandra said. Deicide nodded and then returned to the bathroom. Many centuries ago, he had been totally against extramarital relations or concubines, but his wife had insisted as they grew increasingly sexually incompatible. Not's preoccupation with work had always made her difficult to love, but at her core she had always been such a warm person, supposedly even the first time he had been her husband. If one could consider a clone the very same man, of course. He had guessed that was why she had been so adamant about shoving him into the arms of other women. Perhaps she had simply gotten bored with him, and he had heard the same complaints from other long-living couples he had met in his travels. They continued to love each other, assuredly, but after several years that lasting love had become increasingly platonic in nature, perhaps even maternal. Deicide shuddered to think of it, but when their journey began he was just a boy, and the hurt of losing his biological mother, rather, all of his mothers, was still a raw wound. He sighed and supposed this strange relationship was inevitable. It would seem that Not had known what was best for him all along, in schooling and in matchmaking of surrogate lovers. Selection of these women involved several algorithms developed by Not, as they had to meet Deicide's needs concerning attraction, and Not's desires for superior genetics and temperament, which would fortify the new obtrusion race. But many women were appalled by Deicide's odd sleeping arrangements. There existed a very small group of women who could comfortably sleep near the abyss, a creature that never actually slept, a vigilant alien sentinel, always observing, judging. Even the most hardened, deathless soldiers thought it disturbing that Deicide could sleep with something that watched him tirelessly as he slept. He himself liked the idea, and considered the abyss the most important member of his entourage. Deicide smacked his lips as he studied his image in the vanity display projecting him, removing crusts from the corners of his eyes and mouth. The bathroom, as well as the rest of his estate, was an example of the amount of wasted space on board the Yolopile. In her infancy, the glorious vessel was a claustrophobic's hell. Though still quite large, it had been filled with supplies and resources not but used to outfit the very first of their company. Its only 2 crew members at the time, Deicide and Not, did not even have a berthing to sleep in, let alone a stateroom. Presently, a stateroom was doled out to even the freshest of boot camp graduates, with lavish condos given to junior officers and entire mansions to heavy brass. The Yolopile will provide was the saying on board. Of course, it was only given to those that had provided for the Yolopile. The Abyss had twisted her shape into something cute, but still blacker than a devil's heart roasted in hell, and shrank herself to the size of a basketball. She waddled around the bathroom with egg-shaped feet, feigning an uproarious march and tooting one of the Yolopile's more nationalistic themes. Meanwhile, Deicide gargled with a red cleaning solution. The partially acidic solution burned away any plaque or germs as well as food particles betwixt his fangs. Then he dashed into the shower and punched in a value on the holographic menu, immediately drenching him in a cool blue liquid from all angles. He twisted and turned his limbs so that all portions of him would be covered. Brown skin particles peeled away and headed towards the drains. Other options were available. Deep peelings, or with a stronger solution, one could render himself completely hairless. He removed himself from the shower and patted across the floor, the towel instantly absorbing the moisture dripping from his body. He palmed some shaving gel and spread it across his jaw and chin, then immediately washed it away, leaving his face smooth and lubricated. The Abyss increased her mass and flew toward the man, wrapping him in her silky folds, drying him thoroughly. He re-entered the bedroom to find the lights on and his rack of uniforms extended from the wall. With a small remote in hand, the clothes began to cycle through the U-shaped frame from which they hung. It had slipped his mind what he had told his staff to wear to quarters this morning. A brief mental query to the amanuensis array gave him the answer. The sensation of receiving a mental answer, not from his own mind, had just now become commonplace. He recalled how strange it had been at first, speculating on some corner of dark philosophy, when a train of thought which was not his own burst into his consciousness. He had looked upon these feminine intruders as carpetbaggers, who were here to sway his authority as captain, but he eventually grew to accept their perspectives. Like the Abyss, their concerns dealt mainly with Deicide the man, and not his legacy or his campaigns. Not meant the amanuensis as being a tool for his own self-reflection and study, not as a means of boosting Deicide's intelligence, though some thought that it did. He would never be smarter than his best amanuensis. He selected a dark blue officer's uniform. His was cut to look more like a suit, already adorned with his rank insignia, correct color, and length of cordons, which were ornamental loops of fabric hung on both sides of the belt. These acted in place of formal medals and told the story of an eater's career. With easily discernible patterns, shapes, and colors, anyone on board could read each other's military biography with a glance. Not at once sought to outlaw the practice, because of rivalries and cliques that had formed within the military, but the enlisted soldiers in Deicide's protest had silenced the bill. He slipped on his pants and sat down on the bed as the Abyss reached up the shoes she had selected for him. Sanandra rose up and lay upon his shoulders and kissed a large scar on his neck, a blow that had nearly decapitated him centuries ago. "You don't want anything before you go?" she said. Deicide shook his head. Sanandra squeezed him tighter. "I won't be here when you get back. Rotation," she said. Deicide gently freed himself, stood up, and finished dressing himself. "No, I had a good time," he said. Sandra made a sound that caused the Abyss to bristle. "That's all?" she said. "What are you getting at?" he said. The Abyss was buttoning his collar. 2 of her tendrils had formed themselves into gentle black hands. The rest of them were caricatures of ancient weapons, daggers, swords, and ridiculars, an extrusion blade that resembled a giant, sharpened cricket bat. "Aren't I your favorite? Lady Knight had a talk with all of us," she said, ignoring the Abyss's overtly hostile gesture. Deicide's gaze went cold. "There is no woman that could replace Not. Even the Pretender God couldn't make another," he said. "I know you love her. I never said I wanted to take her place. But you'll need someone after she's gone," she said, reaching forward. She stopped just short of touching him, as each eye of the abyss was looming over Deicide's shoulders. The abyss knew of the man's weaknesses, even if he would not admit them to himself. Deicide's face went slack, and a grief he had tried so hard to hide began to force its way to the front of his mind. He tightened his lips, slipped on his coat, and fled from the room. As the abyss followed so closely, she absorbed the sound of his footsteps. He cursed the woman for feeling beyond the boundaries between them. It was not her place to speak to him in such matters so frankly, at least not yet.